the way you are on the tables to be sure that we have all the elements, and I will stay there available to answer some questions. But I want also this to be interactive, so I will pause a little bit after my small sections to see if there are some burning questions that we would like to discuss in the plenary before you go to the small groups. And in the small groups as well, you can also come after the discussion with questions. So first, I wanted to discuss the humanitarian principles. The way I want to discuss that is, first, I want to talk about the 4 fundamental principles that I know are guiding humanitarian action work for many years. And we come to the Sphere Foundation chapters. I hope you know about the Sphere project that is about minimum standards, but the foundation chapters are about principles. So there are 3 foundation chapters. They are the humanitarian chapter, the protection principles, and the core humanitarian standard. So you see the core humanitarian standard that I will talk about in detail is linked to the principles in this sphere. So I will start to do it with the humanitarian principles, the principles that I have learned when I was getting into working with the humanitarian in the humanitarian sector. So these 4 principles are what, for me, are the foundation, are the basis on which we are working. I would like to go through them here. This is the synthesis of it. You might find some more details in other documents, but let's look at these 4 principles now. The first one is humanity. We will all agree that everything that we are doing is about a human being, and the way it's said, it as human suffering must be addressed wherever it's found. The purpose of humanitarian action is to protect life and health and ensure respect for human being. This is the fundamental thing. We are taking care of people or human being. If there is suffering everywhere it is, humanitarian action needs to protect life and health and assure respect. You will see these principles are being used in many other documents or standards or guidance that I will be talking about. The second one is about impartiality. Humanitarian actions must be carried out on the basis of need alone. Only needs are important. So this is done, and we give priority to the most urgent cases of distress and making no adverse distinction on the basis of nationality, race, gender, religious belief, class, or political opinion. This is really fundamental for me. It's only, we said it at the beginning, it's to address suffering everywhere we find it. But we also saying in the impartiality that everything that we are doing should base only on the needs of people. We should be trying to address the priorities where those who are suffering the most. This is what we should be trying to do. And we don't base our work on any element that will be linked to the nationality of the people, their race, their gender, their religion, and so on. Fundamental. The third one, which is about independence. The humanitarian action must be autonomous from the political, economic, military, or other objectives that any actor may hold with regard to area where humanitarian action is being implemented. very important as well. We won't be trying to base our work to address an objective that won't be purely humanitarian, that will be serving, for example, political objectives or economic objectives. So humanitarian action need to be independent from these objectives. And the last one, neutrality. Humanitarian actors must not take side in hostilities or engage in controversies of a political, racial, religious, or ideological nature. Another fundamental one. So we have these 4-1. We will see it in, later on the humanitarian, core humanitarian standard. These are the principles on which we are working. We know also that in the humanitarian sector, there is a debate on the principle. We see, as I show it here, this is from 1965, that these principles have been declared at the Red Cross and Red Cross movement. We are working with this, but we know some people will say neutrality will not prevent organizations to do advocacy when they feel it is important. So some organizations will say, yeah, we know we work on neutrality, but we also have to advocate for some respect of human being in some cases, in some conflicts or contexts that the sea is not working. So this is what is it for me. These are the foundation, the basis on we are working on, and we are progressing. I would like to say I will continue, but if someone has a comment to make on the principles now, I will say I'm open to comment or question as I go, because what I want is to make this session really interactive. So don't hesitate to raise your hand, ask for the microphone if you have something to say or you want any clarification. Thank you. I would like to move to the other element that we are also using as a foundation. This is from the Sphere Handbook, this one that have been published in 2018. But the first one was published in 2008, 1998, I would say, and was finalized in 2000. And that have been updated or revised many times in the past already. But what is it that is very fundamental? The Humanitarian Charter tried to put together all the legal principles and law that are being used as foundation for the humanitarian work, and they put it in the Humanitarian Charter. This is the common shared basis in the humanitarian work that is put there. And you see this, I summarize them in the 3 areas. That is the right to life with dignity that we need to apply, to use when we are working, the right to receive humanitarian assistance, and the right to protection and security. Everything that humanitarian action is doing need to address these one. These rights, we will move to protection principles. The protection principles are derived from the Humanitarian Charter, which put together, as I said, the legal and ethic principles in the sector. So the protection principles they are set to, I would say, to operationalize or to put into practice these law and legal and ethical principles. So we have 4 of them written here. The one is enhance people's safety, dignity, and rights, and avoid exposing them to further harm. You will clearly see that the do no harm element will come in a few minutes in this session. Let's take the second one is to ensure people's access to impartial assistance according to need and without discrimination. You will remember what we talked about, the impartiality in the humanitarian principles. It's also taken here. Third one, assist people to recover from the physical and psychological effect of threatened or actual violence, coercion, or deliberate deprivation. This is also linked to right to be assisted every time people are suffering physically or psychologically. And the last one is to help to claim their rights. This is also very important. We will see all of them being incorporated in the way that we can take these principles and put them into action. This is what is very important. We will see in a few minutes. Before I go further, I would like to pause a little bit here to see if there is any comment around these principles that are, for me, the basis, the foundation for the work that we are doing in the humanitarian sector.
Well, there's no comment in the room as yet. Maybe we can proceed further.
Thank you. Let's continue. Now let's move to the humanitarian standard partnership. What is interesting in the sector is that we have seen the sphere standard. Sphere standard, we have seen the foundation chapters. Sphere standard has 4 technical standards. This is about water and sanitation and hygiene. We have food security, we have shelter, and we have health. These are technical standard chapters in the standard. But we also know that there are many other standards coming in on the education, economic recovery. We have inclusion of disabled people and old people. We have a list of standards coming in, and the initiative for Sphere at the beginning was to create what they call at the beginning company standard. To make sure that there are the foundations, everybody will be using the foundation, will be linked to the foundation, consider them and use them. But in technical sectors, as I said, food, shelter, wash, and health, we will need specific technical standards. This is normal. But we don't want to see in the sector a list of standards that are not linked to each other, or people will find it completely difficult or get lost how to use, what to use, and when. That's why the Humanitarian Standard Partnership is created to come to regroup the standard in a way that people find it very easy to follow. So the aim of the partnership is to improve the quality and accountability of humanitarian action across all sectors and harmonized approach to support users in the application of standard. So now, for the moment, you see all these standards are there. We have 8 standards together. You see, as we described, you see here in the middle, this is what we have as the foundations, the humanitarian charter, the protection principles, and the core humanitarian standards. And we have all the technical standards around them. Something that is very interesting that we did at when the standard, the last version, the one that is published in 2018, the Sphere standard, we try to make sure that in each of the technical chapters, what we discuss about the principles and the core humanitarian standard commitment that we'll talk about in a few minutes, these are reflected in the technical standard. In the way that when an organization is working in the sector or in a technical area, like take, for example, food security, when this organization is applying the Sphere standards, the organization is automatically trying to meet the CHS commitment. And the organization is automatically trying to apply the principles or work according the principles that are in the humanitarian chapter and the protection chapter. This is what we try to do in a way that we are completely sure that we don't multiply the standards. So we did that in partnership with Sphere to make sure that, and then we have other standards coming in. I will take another one, the example of the standards on the inclusion of older people and people with disabilities. As the core humanitarian standard is one of the foundation chapter of the Sphere, and the fact that the core humanitarian standard put in the center the people we are working with. These standards, inclusion of older people and people with disabilities, they were just they were following the core humanitarian standard in the way that an organization who is working with these standards, trying to meet the standard, this organization is completely working toward the humanitarian, the core humanitarian standard. So this is the element around the standard. There is an app you can connect to the humanitarian partnership standard app, and you can see the link to the all the standards. I will now move to the core humanitarian standard. As I said, the core humanitarian standard is not something that is working disconnected to the other standards. It's incorporated in the handbook that I showed you, that we see the image here, that the one that was published in 2018, completely incorporated. What you will see in that document is the CHS guidance note and indicators. These have been updated in 2018 and incorporated in Sphere. You also have the core humanitarian standard booklet, a small booklet that I'm showing here, that you can also share the link to you. This one is putting the core standard. We will talk about it now, but in a few minutes, the structure, you have the commitment, the 9 commitment, you have the quality criteria, the key actions and organizational responsibilities that are put together in a small booklet that you can take everywhere. This is what is the materials around the standard, the core humanitarian standard now. I will move forward to talk about what is the standard, what is the CHS when we say the CHS. The name we say the core humanitarian standard on quality and accountability. This was published in 2014, published by 3 organizations, CHS Alliance, Sphere, that I mentioned already, and Group UALE, which is a French organization working on quality and accountability. It was published in 2014, but before this it was published, there have been in 2012 a process called Joint Standard Initiative. At that time, the concern was we need to put together the existing initiatives around the quality and accountability together. As I said, the spirit of humanitarian standard partnership is to avoid multiple standards that are not connected to each other and not to confuse people. So that this process was collectively run by Sphere, CHS Alliance. At that time, it was not CHS Alliance, it was Humanitarian Accountability Partnership Hub. I hope some of you have heard about that. And there was another organization called People in Need, working on the people management, the staff. How do we manage the staff correctly? And all these initiatives at that time work together to create the CHS. And these have been done with a large consultation in the sector, making sure that all types of organizations working in the humanitarian sector are involved in the development of the CHS and endorse it. And what something that was very important at that time is we wanted to see the standard from the perspective of people that put at the center communities and people affected by crisis. This is not a standard that was being designed to serve only, we say, donors or other actors. It was done to make commitment to people and making sure that we are doing everything we can to meet these commitments. So that involved international organizations, UN, donors, and national organizations in several countries, technical experts, and those who were working on standard to make sure that this standard is solid. So we put the people and communities at the center. This is based on the humanitarian principle that we talk about: impartiality, humanity, impartiality, independency, and neutrality. You see that in this in the flower. So the structure that we have for the CHS is we have these 9 commitments. We will have the opportunity to look at the commitment in this session. But let me tell about the structure. Each of them has a quality criteria. The quality criteria is what is written in the flower that we can see here, because it's with a small word, so it reads there. But each of the commitments has also key actions. These are what we believe should be done in the field with people as process, as practice. Humanitarian actors or organizations should be doing to be putting that into practice with people. And organizational responsibilities are everything that we need to put in the organization to create a system that will enable the key actions in the way that we meet the commitment. So it's done in a way that the commitments are put into practice. We have the key actions, we know what we need to do, we have the organizational responsibility. We know what we need to create in our organization to make sure that the commitments are met. This is the flower in the bigger picture, but I will now try to move to the commitment one by one. The first commitment is communities and people affected by crisis receive assistance appropriate and relevant to their need. Creative criteria here is humanitarian response is appropriate and relevance. You will clearly see the connection between this commitment and the principle that we talk about. One of them is when we talk about impartiality, we need to be guided by needs and priority needs. So every time we are working, we really need to make sure that when we are providing something to people or we are involving in what they are doing, we need to make sure that we are not providing something that is not among their priority needs. The second one is about communities and people affected by crisis have access to humanitarian assistance they need at the right time. This is very important for us, what they need and when they need it. So we don't want to do anything that will be disconnected to from the time, and we don't want to come late when we are trying to assist people. So the criteria is here, humanitarian response is effective and timely. I'm just talking about the commitment here before we see the key action and organizational responsibilities. We will see the details of what that means for each of the commitment. I would like here to go through the commitment, and something that is very important for me when I'm doing it is when I will read all the 9 commitments, let's see if everybody feels like we have all the fundamental elements that we need to look at when we are working with people in vulnerable situations. So let me move to the third one. The third one is community and people affected by crisis are not negatively affected and are not and are more prepared, resilient, and less at risk as a result of humanitarian action. I really like this because we don't need, as one of the principals said it, we don't need to create any new harm to people when they are already facing a challenge, a crisis, or something that we are trying to alleviate. We need to make sure that what we are doing is not creating any new harm. But also the other element is to make sure that we are preparing the communities and people to be more resilient. If the crisis comes in again, they will be able to address it very quickly and in a way that they are able to address it. We reinforce their capacity. We base our work on their capacity and strengthen their capacity. Oh, sorry. The fourth one is about communication. Communities and people affected by crisis know their rights and entitlement, have access to information, and participate in decisions that affect them. One that is very, very important to me. And I know there is a session today that will go in depth with this commitment that I'm very happy about. The commitment 5 is one that is also very, very important, that in the sector we are continuing to improve, that is community and people affected by crisis have access to safe and responsive mechanism to handle complaints. So we don't want to continue working without people having the possibility to tell us or to make complaint if something is going wrong in their communities or with what we are doing as humanitarian work. So we have the complaints are welcomed and addressed. We are working with organizations. It's very important that everyone in the communities feel like they can have a say on what is going, not need to be corrected if something is going wrong. The sixth is about coordination. People, communities, and people affected by crisis receive coordinated and complementary assistance. And I know also that this workshop that we are having is for me a sign of coordination, because as Vani explained at the beginning here, the assistance that we have, I heard about military, police, government, and civil society people are together to think of the work. I see it's a very good example of coordination. This is very, very well. And now I also know that you have done some work yesterday to talk about that. Very proud, very happy about it. The seventh one is about learning and improvement. People and communities they can expect delivery on improved assistance as organizations learn from experience and reflection. We can say if you are doing a work, you need to do it in a way that if you have done something today, you get a feedback, you have the mechanism in place to learn from that experience, not to repeat the same mistakes. This is very important for people in the humanitarian sector. 8, this is linked to people who are serving. Communities and people who are affected by crisis receive the assistance they require from competent and well-managed staff and volunteers. So this is about staff, people who are serving the others in the vulnerable situation. These people need to have the right competencies that we need. These people need to be well managed. We don't want to put the staff in the difficult situation or put them at risk when they are serving others. We always say, these people, we need to treat them well. They need to be in a good situation with security to be able to assist the others. And the last one is about resources. So we say community and people affected by crisis can expect that organizations assisting them are managing resources effectively, efficiently, and ethically. This is also very important. So we put this commitment, you will see that every time we put the commitment, we put the communities and people what they need to see or what they need to receive from humanitarian organizations. This is where this is the strength of this CHS, their commitment that we are making to them. And once we have made the commitment, we now need to meet the commitment. So how do we need to meet the commitment? This is where we have these elements that we need to do in our work to make sure that we are doing what is needed to meet the commitment. I will pause a little bit to see if there is a question in the chat. This question, maybe I will pause a little bit here to address this question before we continue if everybody, if it is fine. We have a question from Mambani. Since we have a present from Geneva, I have a question that associates with the humanitarian standard. Was the Geneva Convention followed in the war between Russia and Ukraine? This is one. The second one is, since Ukraine war was part of the 194th state party that signed the convention. Why was it not recognized and implemented? So this is, thank you for this question. This is the question is very linked to the current situation that we are facing. I have to say that, yes, I have to say here I don't have the right answer to that, because we are in the situation where there is a war, and we all know that everything is being done in a way that this war respects. We know about the international humanitarian law. There is a lot of work being done by ICRC and the UN to make sure that this war respects the legal framework in the world. But as I have seen in other situations where the conflict is raised, very difficult sometimes to make sure that everybody is respecting the law. That's why there are mobilizations from ICRC and other actors to connect with the people who are fighting to make sure this is done. I know that it's very difficult to negotiate the corridors, humanitarian corridors for people to fly from Ukraine. This is something that is creating a lot of suffering. I know about all this, but where I sit now, I don't have a very clear answer for that. I'm sorry. That's something that is being discussed and dealt with at high level with the UN and ICRC currently. I will continue this my presentation. I don't know if somebody wants to have a comment on this question before I move.
Bona, I'm just looking at the colleagues. If anyone has a question, can you hear me, Bona?
I can hear you.
Okay. Any questions? I see police looking intensely at me. I want to know if we have any questions. Question from. Sorry, let me give you a mic. Let me give you a mic. Hang on for a question.
Just a question on online commitments on point number 3. You just give us like a good example of that commitment number 3. So humanitarian response strengthens local capacity, not need to cause harm or something.
Sorry, second question, Bona. Hang on.
Yeah, okay. It was it's difficult for me to hear the question. I will, if you don't mind to quickly summarize the question to me.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. First question was on commitment 3. So that's the first question, and it's really he's asking for an example. A colleague from the army is asking for an example of that. What does that mean? Second question we're about to get now. If you can just hold on, we'll just get the second question out of the way so you can answer both questions at the same time.
Thank you, Bona. I think I have 2 questions. Really, mine is around the standards. Would there be any sort of guidance to support the application of the standard? And the second one, if you do say yes, what indicators will you be using to assess the level of application of all these standards?
Did you get that, Bona?
I will like a quick summary if that is okay.
The second question was around how this would be applied. I'm reading off a piece of paper. How does the core CHS make the humanitarian sector more adherent and effective? Is that? Oh, sorry. Will there be any guidance to support the application of the standard? If so, what indicators will be used to assess the level of application of these standards?
Great. I got it now. It's about guidance that will support the application of the standard.
Yes.
And how that is good. Okay, thank you. Okay, for the question on the guidance, I have to say that yes, there are a lot of guidance documents to support the application of the CHS. The one guidance that you will see is what we call guidance note and indicator that is incorporated in Sphere Handbook is the first one. But we also have other documents that are helping organization to apply the CHS. We have developed as a CHS Alliance what we call a verification scheme. So these provide organizations with options to check their capacities and performance about meeting the commitment. And based on that, they can improve with the results, they can improve their way of working. So we have three options. If you are interested, we have three options. The organization can evaluate itself based on the criteria and the indicators that I will talk about in detail. This is self-assessment. We have another option that is independent verification, and the third one is certification. These two are done by an external organization, external auditors, who will check the organization capacities and performance against the standard, against the requirements of the standard, and help the organization to improve the capacities if there are areas of improvement. This is where I'm not taking notes here for this guidance. What I will do, if you allow me, at the end of this session, in the coming that I will put together the links to these resources that I can share with Vani, and Vani can share that with the participants, if that's fine for you. And for the commitment 3, I would like to continue, and we will see details of elements that are included in this commitment. I'm happy to give examples as well when we will be addressing the details on the commitment 3. If there are no any other questions, I will move now to see the commitment details one by one and see what is in it. Let me share this one. Everything that is on this slide, you can find them on this booklet as well. I took them from this booklet. I will share the link with you. If you haven't seen it yet, share the link with you. Here is to discuss them. So for the first one, we have the key action. We have 3 key actions here that are proposed. So the first one is to conduct a systematic, objective, and ongoing analysis of the context and stakeholders. So this is one key action that organizations should be doing. To make sure that we contribute to the humanitarian response is appropriate and relevant, to make sure that people, they receive appropriate assistance that are appropriate to their need, we need to conduct a systematic and objective and ongoing analysis. We are insisting here on ongoing analysis of the context and stakeholders, because we also know that it's not something that you do only once, maybe at the beginning of your, or at the design phase of your program. You need to update this analysis regularly, because in many contexts, the situation can evolve and change, and even the needs of people can change. For example, you start the disaster occurred at the beginning. It's to save life, is to provide water because the water channels have been broken. But as you go, you evolve, and after the crisis, the needs might change. Sometimes we have, the needs have changed from basic element, food, water, to something that will help people to recover their economic activities, or to connect with, to reconnect with education and something else. So this is why it's very important that we continuously assess the context in which we are working. And the second one is to design and implement appropriate program based on an impartial assessment of needs and risks, and an understanding of the vulnerabilities and capacities of different groups. Very briefly here as well, is we talked about impartiality at the principles. This is a way of putting that into practice. So the need assessment should be impartial. We need to assess the needs, but also the risks that people face. And we also need to understand the capacities of different people. This is also where we are tackling the inclusive action. We don't want to do something that will address the needs or understand only a part of the communities or some categories in the communities. So we need to go further to make sure that we have understood the vulnerabilities, but also capacities. Capacities are very important, that we will see in the commitment 3, that if you don't understand the capacities of the organizations, you are not able to strengthen them, to support them, to make them in the way that people are more get out of this disaster more prepared for the next one. So the capacity needs to be analyzed and understood, and also ongoing, following the evolution of the situation. And we need to adapt program to changing needs and capacities and context. This is also reflecting on what I was saying. If you have a good analysis, ongoing analysis, you have the results, you need to adapt the program. It's there because we have seen, the experience has shown that sometimes people can see the evolution of the program, of the needs, but they don't necessarily adapt their program to this evolution. This is where it's very important here. So what do we, these are the actions that are proposed to be done to make sure that we are meeting this commitment that we make to people for them to receive assistance appropriate to their needs. So what are the systems that we need to put in place to do that? This is the organizational responsibilities. We need to have in the organization policies that commit to providing impartial assistance based on the need and capacities of communities and people affected by crisis. Important that to have that policy in place. It's important to create that system, because sometimes we see in some organizations, we do it sometimes we don't do it. It's based on the people who are there. Sometimes are very sensitive. They can say we need to do an impartial assistance based on the need. Some people will come and will focus on something. But if you have the policies, we are applying the policies, we are able to make sure that we are moving toward meeting this commitment. The second organization responsibility is policies set out commitment which take into account the diversity of communities, including disadvantaged or marginalized people, and to collect disaggregated data. Very important. We should have the policy clearly saying that we are taking into account the diversity of the community. As I said at the beginning, it's not to serve only one part of or one type of people, one group, but some people in some communities, they are marginalized, they are disadvantaged. We need to make sure that we have a system in place that is taking them into account. And disaggregated data is very important because, for example, I will take a very simple example of gender. If we are not checking, we are not disaggregating the data we are collecting, we can miss an opportunity to really address the gender diversity, because we don't know in the figures we are having. We say, for example, oh, we want to address needs for 1,000 people in this area, but for that we don't know how many men, girls, children we have there to make sure that the needs, because the needs are not the same, to make sure that we have this knowledge of the composition of the group we are serving. The last one is processes are in place to ensure an appropriate ongoing analysis to the context. If we don't have a system that allows us to do this ongoing analysis, we won't be able to address the action point that we mentioned at the beginning, the 1.1, which is conduct ongoing analysis. So with this example of commitment 1, you see the spirit of the standard and the structure of it. Something that is very important, that's why I was waiting to arrive here with the detail to say it. This is not a quantitative standard. It's not saying, it is not a standard that is also prescriptive to say, this is what you need to address as need. What is being said here is, in each context, we need to address the priority needs. It doesn't say that it's wash, it's food, or something else that's very prescriptive. It says we need to make sure and prove that we have a system in place that allows us to analyze the needs and the stakeholders who are in the context, and we have the practice that address this element. These are the key actions, and the system is about organizational responsibility. This is the way it's done. Somebody asked about the guidance and application of the standard. I will make a point here. For all these key actions and organizational responsibilities, we have created indicators linked to each of them. And organization, this is where what you will see in the guidance, verification guidance. For example, self-assessment guidance. You will see the indicators linked to each of the key actions and organizational responsibilities. And you have a methodology to check if your organization is actually doing the key action, or if your organization actually has the system in place to allow the key action. You check that, you see, oh, yes or no. We have a scoring grid from 0 to 4, described in a way that you check your organization. If you see your score at 1, 0, or 1, you know that you have weakness. If your score is 3 or 4, you know that you are strong. The way we see the commitment or I would say the requirements are met is at 3. So when you get 3, you say, okay, his requirement is is addressed. And based on the result, you correct what is missing in your organization to make sure that you are meeting the commitment. This is the way we are helping organizations to apply the standard. Let me move to the commitment 3, which is about commitment 2, which is about effective and timely. So we have the same thing here. We have the key actions, design program that address constraints so that the proposed actions is realistic and safe for communities. If we don't understand the constraints, we might plan for something that we won't be able to do, and they will get the delay. So we need to design the program that addresses the constraints that is in the context. Deliver humanitarian response in timely manner, making decision and acting without unnecessary delay. These are experience in the sector. I have to say, before I work at the CHS Alliance, I used to be evaluator of humanitarian work for different organizations running from NGOs, national NGOs, donors, UN, and I have seen many times that decision-making process can take too long, and sometimes a crisis occurs, and the time to decide to allocate the resources or to design the project is taking too long, that the needs are changed or people, the program arrived too late. So this one thing that is very important to address that. The third one is refer any unmet need to those organizations with the relevant technical expertise and mandate, or advocate for those needs to be addressed. Very important. We say we want to address the priority needs. We say we need to understand these priority needs, but what if we check the needs, we understand the needs, but we don't have the competencies to do it. We don't have the expertise, we don't have the resources to do it. What do we do? And what is said here for 2.3 is you need to refer the need that you are not able to meet to other organizations and advocate for them to meet these needs, because you have found these needs as priority needs. Use relevant technical standards and good practices employed across the humanitarian sector to plan and assess programs. So this is where the technical standards of SPHERE and the technical standard that I showed you in the humanitarian standard partnership is very important. In each of the technical area we are working on, we need to have the standards that apply for this technical area, and we need to apply them here when we are applying the CHS. Monitor the activities, output, and outcome of humanitarian response in order to adapt program and address poor performance. So this is to push for a monitoring system, a solid monitoring system that will tell us, okay, what we have planned to meet the priority needs, we are actually meeting them, or we are facing some difficulties, then we need to adapt the program to make sure that we meet them. So we see in this commitment, we need to understand the constraints. We need to plan the program in a way that is realistic, but we also need to follow, to monitor what we are doing. If we are not able to address something, we advocate for it to be addressed by other actors. System that we need to put in place, program commitment are in line with organizational capacity. Very important. We are not pushing organizations to go to a technical area where they don't have the capacities. So the program commitments that we are making to do the program need to be in line with our capacities. If I am an organization working on food security, for example, and then I find need for help, it's difficult to do that. And if I don't give myself the expertise, I cannot propose a program to address this one. I need to do what we have already said, advocate for others to take that on board. And we need to have policy commitment that ensure systematic and objective and ongoing monitoring and evaluation of activities and their effect. Evidence from monitoring and evaluation is used to adapt and improve the program, and timely decision-making with resource allocated accordingly. We cannot commit to do something that is big and we don't have the resources. We need to get the resources and do something that is realistic. So you see also the spirit of this commitment is to make sure that we have all the capacities, we do it, and if we don't have the capacity, we advocate for it. We try to find it for the people in the way that the priority needs are met. We need to do it in timely. Timeliness is very important here. I'm continuing, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt and ask the question. I'm also looking at the time we are taking. I will need to move a little bit quickly. Let me talk about the commitment 3 that you already asked a question about. The key actions are there. We'll see the organizational responsibility. The key actions are there: ensure program build on local capacities and work toward improving the resilience of communities and people affected by crisis. So I said that at the commitment 1, to analyze the capacities to be able to build on local capacities. We have seen in many countries, many programs where you might have in the community people who have competence in education, in health, they are nurses, there are many things, but you design a program that brings from outside these competencies that you pay very, very high. You can also build on the existing capacities. We have seen, for example, people they have knowledge in agriculture, they can do many of the things that need to be done. If you have a good community, we see that in the commitment 4. If you have good communication with them, transparency and everything, they can mobilize themselves. We know that people are there, they are taking their life, they are building their life. Many times they don't wait for outside people to come. They are doing something. We just need to understand and support them in what they are doing. We need to use the result of any existing community hazard and risk assessment and preparedness plan to guide activities. This is put there because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to do new assessment. If there have been assessment already, we just need to use that. And preparedness plan already before the disaster, let's consider what is in the sector, in the context before we arrive. Enable the development of local leadership and organization in their capacity as first responders in the event of future crisis, taking steps to ensure that marginalized and disadvantaged groups are appropriately represented. So we are coming back to local leadership and capacities. As I said, many times we see first responders very close to people doing some work, and when the big humanitarian organization, international one, they come, if they don't pay attention to what is there already, sometimes they disrupt the work that first responders do, and they don't support them. So this is what they need to do. And it's written here again, let's make sure that we are not ignoring some groups that might be marginalized or disadvantaged. Plan a transition or exit strategy in the early stage of the humanitarian program that ensure longer-term positive effect and reduce the risk of dependency. When we are doing humanitarian work, don't need to be perpetuated. We need to find a way of exit strategy, making sure that we are creating capacities in the community to continue working. We are reinforcing their resilience in the context before we go. So what we need to avoid here is to arrive at the point where there is no resource and we stop everything without taking time to prepare people to continue. So that will create damage. Design and implement a program that promotes early disaster recovery and benefit the local economy. Early disaster recovery is very important too. It's linked to the resilience. We want people to recover very quickly. As I said before, needs might change, and need might change from very emergency assistance, food and everything, to recovery of people's economic activities. So the 3.6 is covering a lot of elements, I assume, but this is about making sure that there is no negative unintended effect to people. So this is really touching on, we say it's touching on people's safety, security, dignity, and rights. This is to avoid any sexual exploitation and abuse by staff. We don't need to make any problem to the culture, gender, and social and political relationship. We need to preserve the livelihood. We need to preserve the local economy and the environment. So this is about negative impact. We are trying to avoid any negative impact. You will see we have put a focus on some of the elements here: sexual exploitation and abuse. This is linked to the safeguarding discussion and challenge that was in the sector since a few years ago. So you will see the CHS have produced a document. We call it CHS PSCH Index. So Protection from Sexual Exploitation, Abuse and Harassment Index. So we have taken everything that is in the CHS trying to address this sexual exploitation to make sure people are protected against it, to have a kind of a picture of the organization's strength or capacity to address that. So it's very important for us. No negative impact in the commitment 3, strengthening the local actors. You will see this is completely linked to the localization debate and agenda that we are also trying to follow. I realize that I haven't put the organizational responsibilities here, but as I will share with you the booklet, the link, you will see everything in it. So this is about I said about communication, and I know Michael will have a session with you detailing all these elements. So I won't spend a lot of time here because I know it's not, we are not skipping it. We are putting focus on it. You will have it completely detailed and how that can be done. What are the experience already here? This is clearly linked to the accountability to affected people and how do we communicate with them, how do we address their feedback, and the 5 also is linked to that. I leave that to Michael to provide details on it. I will now move to the 6 that I also mentioned that you have already started to work on. One of the things I think you have addressed that yesterday is to identify the role, responsibility, capacity, and interest of different stakeholders. As an organization, I need to understand the others' capacity and responsibilities to be able to connect and complement what we are doing. So we also need to ensure humanitarian response complement that of national and local authorities and other humanitarian work. I won't go through them all because I know you are progressing, and what you are doing now is very well connected to this. Okay, I will try to move a little bit on it. I like to talk about the 7-1, and this is very important. We have seen with the experience in the sector that the challenge, the commitment that are very challenging the humanitarian sector, when we look at their performance, one of them is this. What we know is the commitment 5 is challenging. The commitment 4 is another challenge in the sector, and the commitment, this commitment is also a challenging one. The 3 are as well. So this is about how do we learn from the experience that we have. So draw on lesson learned and prior experience when designing program. I have seen personally a lot of program when in the same organization, I was trying to see what have been done in the past, and you will see that maybe there have been evaluations, there have been monitoring, there have been recommendations, but sometimes you will be surprised that these elements are not being taken into account in the new program. So this is very important. And learn, innovate, and implement change on basis of monitoring, evaluation, feedback, and complaint. That is what I already mentioned. Share learning and innovation internally with communities and people affected by crisis. So we have seen that this indicator for many organizations, they must have the learning, but the learning will stay with a department or will stay in the documents that have been written a few years ago. It's not shared internally. So this is very important. The organization responsibility we need to do that is to have evaluation and learning policies in place, and means are available to learn from the experience. I've seen in many organizations now, they have evaluation department, or they have meal officer, they have somebody, and they have guidance to do this element. This is what we need to have. And when we have it, we need to have adapt our program based on the learning. Mechanism exists to record knowledge and experience and make it accessible throughout the organization. And the organization contributes to learning and innovation in humanitarian response among peers and within sectors. Surprisingly, we have seen some of the organization making guidance and providing experience, sharing the guidance publicly, but internally, there is no mechanism that makes sure that people internally, they are also getting the experience and the knowledge that is coming from the experience. The 8 is all about the staff. How are we managing the staff? Staff work accordingly to the mandate and value of the organization to agreed objectives and performance standards. That means that we need to make the mandate and value very clear to the staff so that they work accordingly. Staff adhere to the policies that are relevant to them and understand the consequences of not adhering to them. One example here is to say, if we have a protection DSCA policy or safeguarding policy, and the staff does not adhere to it or don't know the consequences that if they breach the law or the rule, what will happen to them, then we are not doing it well. As I see, I have a limited time left. I won't go one by one as I was trying to do it. But let me go to the 9 commitment. I think you have understood now the structure, the way we are trying to make the commitment work very, very well. So the 9 is about resources, how they are managed. One thing I wanted to put here my finger on is natural resources. So when using natural resources, consider the impact on the environment. We don't want the humanitarian work to disturb the natural environment in where we are working. So you have the policies here. Also, this one is addressing a lot of things, but you see concern about environment, concern about financial audit, fraud. All these elements need to be taken into account. So now we have gone through the 9 commitments that are in the CHS. This is meant to cover essential elements of humanitarian work linked to the principles that we talked about earlier. Before I finish and invite and open the floor for that discussion, just wanted to mention to you that the CHS, the core humanitarian standard we talked about, will be revised this year. It was a few years, as I said, it was published in 2014. And now we will review the standard. We know that we have now knowledge about its application. We also know that the sector has evolved. We just need to make sure that the standard is still relevant and addresses the current challenges and the future challenges that will come. And just want to mention that the CHS Alliance I represent here is a membership organization. And now we are focusing on local knowledge and leadership. The revision that we are doing will have consultation in countries in the region, and Pacific we plan to have activities there. I might share with you the link to attend the launch event to learn more about the revision process. So get ready to be involved in the revision process when that will come. I will make sure that you are informed. I will say now let's open it. What I planned at the beginning is to give some time for you to discuss in the room, around the table, see what do you see in your area of working, in your the context in which we are working. What do you see as challenge or opportunity to engage with the CHS or other humanitarian standards? Are there constraints or challenges for you to take the standard and apply it or not? This is what I wanted to discuss, and I'm also happy to answer the questions that you might have. I'm checking this with Vanny. Vanny, do we have time to take a few moments to have these table discussions?
Thank you, Bona. So just how long do you have for that? The 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's take a few minutes, five minutes for people to discuss, and then feed the group with the main thing that they see as challenge and opportunities. And if there are any questions also raised, I'm happy to answer. Vanny, I don't hear you. can't hear anything now.
Bona, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you.
Did we
That
lose
was-
you?
The sound was cut.
Hello,
Hello, do you hear me?
Bona?
Yes, do you hear me?
Can we go ahead with the questions, Bona?
Yes, please.
Can we go ahead with the question, Bona?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, we're just trying to get our connection back. But the participants, you can still hear us. So I'm going to ask one of the participants to raise their question now. And if you have problems hearing it, I'll try and translate. Okay. Hey, can I get some silence around the room, please? Thank you. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Okay, sorry. Okay, we're having problems with our connection. Was there a specific commitment that you wanted to ask?
Commitment, no. Was launching something in May.
Yes, the review.
The new alliance is local knowledge and
Yes, local leadership.
local leadership. I was just talking to my colleague here on disasters. We have known several months from November to April.
Yes.
Go back to how elders build things. It's one set aside. No food and
Yes.
livestock.
Yes.
They have laurels for
Yes.
to the side for. I attended once in the seminar when Patiga in Dubai was given.
Yes.
He
Correct.
said case study from Hawaii. Government funds Thursday project for elderly.
Yes.
So that was one, and another one plus was the sixth.
Right.
Six or seven, only the rest,
Okay.
thankfully. But it's not gonna discuss with other agencies get complicated. I was just telling my new colleagues, also Navy Boat Police, can have members of FCOSS for you. I know it's a long shot, but members of FCOSS will have an interest with them, to know what way. And still as well.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Bona, can you hear us?
I will appreciate if you can quickly summarize. Sorry.
Hello,
Yes.
Bona.
Yes. Do you hear me?
Hang on. Hang on. Bona, that was a kind of a sharing, not so much a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, great. So I'm just gonna let you know what that reflection was.
Yes.
So I guess there were comments on both commitment, I think it was commitment 6 or 7 that our colleague from the army was talking.
Do you hear me?
Okay, so sorry, colleagues, bear with me. We're having some technical issues.
Yes.
Sorry, participant.
Okay, Bona, sorry, we just had a comment from our colleague about the review process and the mention of, or at least acknowledgement of local leadership, and his sharing was around indigenous knowledge for food security. In indigenous perhaps approaches, particularly here in Fiji, we have the concept of food banks. That's what he mentioned. It's called, lololo. And I mean, I think it's really an acknowledgement of the practices of our elders in the past, where, really looking at resilience practices that perhaps we have now come to appreciate. Thankfully, there are still some of that we use, it's intertwined in some of the work that we do around disaster response. I think it was really a reflection, and the gentleman was trying to connect that to commitment 6 or 7. I think about localization. I think there's a commitment there about fostering local capacities for resilience.
Yes.
I think that was more a reflection. Did you need a response? No? Okay, so that's a reflection. I'm going to move to the other tables, perhaps the corner table, if there were comments that you have. Hang on, bonus, sorry, we're just passing the mic around. Now, none from that table here, please. Questions, comments, colleagues, police? Yosuwa? A lot to take in. First time for you to hear about co-humanitarian standards. So it's the first time for many of them to hear about the co-humanitarian standards. Did you have a reflection that you wanted to share?
Just that on the online it says it is like 150 members. Because organizations that are verified to follow them.
Yes. So Bona, the second question is, the 150 members that you have, are those organizations, do they, upon joining CHS Alliance, are there, approaches that they take to ensure their compliance? Or what does it mean to be your member?
Great, thank you for that question. All our members have committed to apply the co-humanitarian standard. So all the members coming to us, it means that they have accepted that the co-humanitarian standard, what they need to apply when they are working with vulnerable people. They commit to make aid work better for people. So they are also committed to put people at the center of what they do. So we have as a requirement for members to demonstrate their application of the CHS. As I said, we have 3 options. We have self-assessment, independent verification, and certification. And we offer that to our members. They have to go through one of these options, because when they do, we know their capacity regarding the CHS, and we support them if there is a need to improve on some of the requirements. So all the 100 and more than 160 now that we have as members, they all have to go through CHS verification. For now, not all of them have done it, but we are working together with them to have them all verified and supported to meet the commitment. In the end, what we want to have is all the members, they are working toward meeting the commitment, and they are actually meeting the commitment. This is what we are trying to do. So if an organization wants to join the alliance, we are continuing to encourage organizations to join. When we join the alliance, we receive the necessary information, accompaniment to get your organization verified, and you are supported to do the improvement action that are needed. I will also share with you the link to our website and the link to the application form. So what we normally do, we ask organizations to submit the application, but also submit some of the documentation that prove that they are regularly registered, they have audited accounts, they have the annual report, activities they have done. All these things will go through the board. The board commission will review all this, and once they are approved that all the organization is in line with what we are trying to do, we also ask to fill in a CHS alignment statement. This is just to take the CHS commitment and explain what the organization is currently doing to meet the commitment and what are the future plans for the organization. That will help the board committee to understand better the organization. And then we make the application approved, and the organization member can benefit from the CHS Alliance services. I hope that answers the question.
I know that we are 3 minutes away from tea. Question? Cindy?
Hi, Bona. So ours is challenge. So we see that we have the 4 humanitarian principles, and you also spoke on partnership, and then you had the codes. I think really our questions trying to understand whether at some particular point those core standards does not affect the legitimacy of organizations, especially during everything's going haywire, everything's coming up. So what sort of we're just trying to understand if at any particular point the core standards will not affect the legitimacy of organizations. Thank you.
I'm sorry, the sound was cut, so I haven't heard all the element of the question. I'm sorry about that.
Can you hear me, Bona?
I can hear. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the question was around agility of organizations. The concept around the tightrope that you have to walk as an organization when you want to comply with the standards or when you want to apply the standards, but also keeping in mind that you want to remain agile enough to respond to, like, for example, in Fiji, we have multiple crises. Like, the last one that we experienced was 2 cyclones and then a COVID-19 wave. How do you remain agile? Have you had issues in the past of members trying to comply, but then that restricted their ability to be agile?
This is a good question, because we hear that question a lot. Organizations saying, okay, the time and the resources they need to comply with the CHS in the situation where they have emergency, it's difficult. But what we have learned, I just want to share this with you. We have seen, let's say the COVID response. We have seen some organizations who have been applying the CHS, who have noticed some of the weaknesses in their system, and they reinforce their capacities. They have been much more strong and very efficient and effective in the COVID response, especially when we know that for the COVID response, there was a very important element about the communication with the people, making sure that there is no rumors or bad information circulating. We have seen this organization performing very well. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to say to this is not that in a very few moments we will need to apply all of them. When we do the verification, you set priorities. So you might say, I have seen, maybe I have weaknesses in 5 areas, but for this year, I'll make the plan to focus, I make priorities to focus on 2 or 3. So you progressively improve. We don't say that you have to do everything at the same time. We know it's not realistic, but you can stay agile, as you said, responding to the crisis, prioritizing some of the elements that you know you will be strengthening, because that will help you respond to the situation you are facing in the context very effectively. So we call it a continuous improvement. Quality is a continuous improvement. So the application of the standard is the same thing. It's the continuous improvement. The only thing that we encourage organizations to do, that's why it's a requirement for CHS Alliance members, is to know where you stand regarding meeting the commitment. When you know where you stand, you know how to prioritize activities to do to improve your capacities and your performance. I hope that helped for that question.
Thank you, Bona. I'm looking around the room to see if there's any more burning questions, because we simply have run out of time. We're 2 minutes into your tea time. I also note that there's Jenny from Pacific Red is already in the room. So if there are no more questions, one last question. Okay, police.
If there is no more question, I don't want to take too much time from Jenny. So if there is no question.
We have one more question, Bona.
Okay.
So there's actually a good question here with regards to commitment. Contingency plans in place for responding to new or evolving crises. Are they not to start? This question. The second question is with regards to commitment 4. Is data provided through feedback mechanisms is agreed by age, gender, or other relevant categories?
Did you hear that, Bona?
Sorry, no. I had few words. I had gender, for example, but if you can help me understanding the question, that would be good.
The 2 questions. The first one is on commitment 3. A contingency plan in place for responding to new or evolving crises, and if so, are they known to staff? And the second question is on commitment 4. Is data provided through feedback mechanism disaggregated by age, gender, and other relevant categories?
Okay, thank you. For the first one about the contingency plan on everything. We really want organization to plan for it. Everything that you will see in the standard is based on the experience, because if we don't plan for, we said, exit strategy or contingency plan or preparation, then you are not really reinforcing the capacities of the organization, of the people, and for community-based organization to be strong for the next crisis if it occurs. That's why we are pushing for that. So sometimes it's not, so we see that this is sometimes a little bit difficult for organization to plan for preparation or contingency plan, because when we are doing that, there is nothing very strong and visible that you have as a crisis to respond. But this is very important, because when the crisis occurs, then people are more strong to address it. This is about the commitment 3 contingency plan. The second one, please remind me the second one.
The second one has to do with data that are provided on feedback mechanism. Are they disaggregated into age, gender, or should they?
Yes, should they? Yeah, they should, because as I said at the beginning, for the needs, if you don't understand the need of each of the categories, gender, the young people, elderly, then you won't be able to address them. It's the same thing for the feedback. We have seen that sometimes if you don't have this disaggregated data or knowledge, sometimes you will see that we have seen that for feedback, some categories, they use some channels to provide feedback, and others use other channels. If you take, for example, men, I will tell you from Africa, where I'm from, men will use another channel, and women will use another one. For example, we have seen in some countries, now that there is mobile phone or digital application to give feedback, when you disaggregate, you see a lot of feedback coming from men, because women are using, in the very rural and remote areas, they are using the phone less, and they prefer another channel that is conversation, that is face-to-face, that is through the midwife or something like that. We just need to understand and each category's way of providing feedback. That's why it's very important to get disaggregated data of the community and get the feedback, disaggregate that as well.
Thank you, Bona. I know that it's almost, or it's over. I think it's after midnight for you on that side. We just want to take this time to thank you for joining us and sharing, giving us a crash course of CHS. So thank you from all of the participants here. We'll share your contact details with them in case there's a follow-up or there's interest from the various organizations that want to learn a little bit more about what CHS is. But I trust that you're planning a trip to the Pacific. We hope that you can get to Fiji as part of that. Thank you once again. I'll ask the participants to join in. Thank you.
Thank you. As you said, I'm very happy. I'm available to continue the conversation if you come to me. Please share. I will also try to share with you in the coming days links to the resources we mentioned during this session. And again, I'm really available to continue the conversation. And Fiji will be in our radar for the coming activities and the revision of the CHS. From my as well, thank you very much for your attention and for the participation. I like the questions. Thank you.
Participants, I know that we've got into your tea time. We were supposed to start again at 10:45. I know Jenny's in the room. Jenny, can you let us know if you can hear us? So, hi, Jenny. Do you mind if we can just grab maybe 10 minutes, just 10 minutes to let the participants grab their tea? We'll get them to bring that in and then we'll get you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's not a problem. It's probably a good opportunity to test the slides if they're working as well.
Awesome. Great. So we have about 10 minutes to grab our tea. Sorry, there's a lot of content this morning, but we've got limited time, but you know, we've got a plan to ensure that we have some time to process this evening. And if Alicia hasn't spoken to you, she will probably speak to you during tea about the rooms tonight. Right, thank you. Shall we go off to tea? Thank you.
Actually, I need to co-host. So
Could you just please do me a favor? If I share my screen, would you be able to check if it's coming out properly?
sure, we can do that now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see the screen.
So can you see my screen? I can't hear you.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, then if I do that, can you see the second screen?
Yeah.
And you can hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay,
Loud.
super then. Yeah, super. Thank you. Let me know when you're ready. Oh, can I just check who's in the room?
Right now.
No, the participants, how many people we have, who we have from which organizations?
We have around 30 participants altogether. We have representatives of the discipline force, which include the military, the navy, and also the police force. And also half of the participants are civil society organization representative. And we also have a rep from the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development, which is the supervisory ministry for the NDMO office.
Okay, who's from the NDMO? Just out of curiosity.
Not from NDMO, but from the ministry, the district office.
Ah, the actual ministry. Okay, yeah, no worries. All right, super. And can I just check during yesterday, did anybody show the CHS Alliance core humanitarian standards on video?
We've just finished the session on CHS with Bona from CHS Alliance. So that is.
Did he get a chance to share the humanitarian core standards for humanitarians on YouTube by any chance?
Yes, we went through each standard one by one.
Excellent, excellent. No, that's awesome. Wonderful. Thank you. Those are all the questions I had.
Okay.
I'll let you go and have your break. Encourage everybody to bring in their coffee. This one's pretty heavy.
Make sure to do that now.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Jenny, we're just getting back into the room now. People are just starting to come in. Give us about a minute. Alicia, your laptop is updating. I tell you. Can I just take it and throw it outside? Okay, then plug in Josiah.
Okay, can you
What was in there?
can you see the presentation in front of you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, is the PowerPoint showing okay?
I can see it, but I'm trying to get that on the screen. Hang on.
Okay, super. I think you've kicked me out.
You're still here. We're just trying to figure out this screen with right. Okay. So All right, Jenny, can you attempt to share your screen, please? Sorry, we had to change laptops.
So what am I doing? Sorry?
Sharing your screen.
I'm sharing my screen again. Okay. All
Yes.
right. No worries. Give me 2 seconds then. All right. Is this working?
Thank you, Jenny. We can see your slide.
Okay. Does it say introduction to humanitarianism?
Yes.
You can't see my notes, right? Sorry. Okay. I'm ready when you are.
All right, Jenny. Okay, welcome back, participants. Sorry, welcome back, participants. I know that we have been receiving some heavy content this morning. I think I appreciate that Mona took some time to go through the details. And that shows us that there are, they're not just commitments that you make, they're not just rhetorics, there are actual guidelines as to how we make this a reality at the organizational level. I think that was useful. But I have much pleasure in welcoming Jenny. Jenny, she's a regional manager for the Pacific for Red R Australia, and I'll give her this time now to introduce herself, introduce Red R Australia. Jenny, before I hand it over to you, we have civil society colleagues, we have community responders, we have the RFMF, as well as police, and we have a colleague, thankfully from the Ministry of Rural Development, as well in the room. Welcome. We had hoped that you would be here, but this is our first time. We'll probably be looking at some future events together, hopefully face to face. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Vani. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jenny Lee from Red R Australia. You can all hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jenny Lee from Red R Australia. It's lovely meeting you. It's quite sad that I'm not there with you. We've actually had some exciting activities ready so you can do some outside, because this is a theory heavy session, and unfortunately COVID's threw some spanners in the works and I couldn't be there with you. I'm stuck in Australia and I couldn't go back to Suva, unfortunately. But look, just a huge thank you to Vani from the Fiji Council of Social Services for extending the invite to Red R Australia to participate in what is an important discussion for many of the responding actors. And it is certainly a pleasure for us to be here with you today. So just a little bit about myself. I have a background in international human rights law, specializing in gender and transitional justice. I was an army officer in the Australian Defence Force as well, and was involved in some of the responses myself in the past. From the humanitarian sector, I worked with UNHCR in Central America and WFP in their headquarters over in Italy, in Rome as well. I've also had some field work in various parts of Asia in the past. More in the last 5 years, I was involved in advisory roles in the Department of Defence in Australia, to the Senior Executive Management on Gender, Women, Peace and Security and Protection of Civilians, so a little bit to do with peacekeeping operations there. And more recently, more towards the civil military coordination in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So I had a lot to do with their regional policy mechanisms in the HADR, or HADA as people call it, and also in the women, peace and security policy in the region as well, before I came to the Pacific. Now, I've been asked to give you a bit of a theory so yesterday you went through a lot about the NDMO and what you actually do. Everybody in this room has experience in responding to a disaster in Fiji or various types of crisis. Today, I think there's a lot of focus on, you know, what in an ideal world, what the response should look like, and the various things that different actors, so yourselves, should be doing on the ground, so that it is more people focused, so that we assist those people who need assistance the most in the right way. So what I'll be going through today with you are some of the history of what we consider humanitarianism, how the world came to be today in our world, in the world of humanitarianism. And hopefully from what you've seen yesterday, what you've discussed today, we'll be able to connect the dots as why certain actors, especially the civil society and the professional humanitarian actors, state certain things, like how they do, and the various important roles that everybody has in this place when we're responding. So just quickly, I'll give you a bit of an insight about Radar Australia. I've learned from our SUVA office that Radar Australia is relatively new in the Pacific, so we'll give you a bit of an introduction to what we do. We'll talk a little bit about humanitarianism, the concept of humanitarianism, and the different interpretations globally. And it will be really nice to hear your views on what that means to you specifically. We'll talk a little bit about international law that's relevant to this concept of humanitarianism and the principles. You already know the principles, I think. You've probably been exposed to it, especially in the last couple of days. So we'll talk a little bit about the principles and why we keep on talking about this, and why it is so important, and why it is so important for different actors. So the military personnel in the room, the police, the civil society, the NGOs, why is it so important to keep to our own lanes, right? Everybody has a different job in the room, but it is also important that we keep to our jobs instead of jumping into someone else's lane, so that the response can be coordinated, it avoids duplication, but also, and the most importantly, it assists people who are in need as best way as possible, and also in the most efficient way possible. And that is the reason why we talk about the humanitarian principles. We'll talk a little bit about civil military coordination, and in that we also have police. Unfortunately, the police always gets dropped out of the civil military coordination element because they get pulled into the civil side of things. But over the years, what at least I've learned in this space is that the police has a special, space in this coordination mechanism, because when it comes down to law enforcement, when it comes down to community response, the police are generally at the forefront. They understand the community really well. You know, they are able to be that nice link between the civil society as well as the military. And they hold this nice special space in between, and they become an extremely important actor when it comes down to coordination elements during response. And of course, you know, as Bona mentioned, we'll finish off touching a little bit about, you know, principled humanitarian action. Okay. During our discussion about what humanitarian means to you, we'll touch a little bit about the concept of principle. You know, humanitarian work is now becoming more and more professionalized, but how do we make it so that it's more principled, so that we do the right thing, right? There's a concept of understanding what right thing means to you individually, but what does it mean as a group and as a professional? So we'll talk a little bit about that, because there are some core principles that go and guide that principled humanitarian action. Okay, so a little bit about Red Eye Australia. Red Eye Australia was established in the UK in the 1980s by an engineer called Peter Guthrie. And he developed this organization called the Register of Engineers for Disaster Relief. And that's where we get the word Red Eye from. And he did that in response to the Vietnamese humanitarian crisis in the 1970s. And on his return from that deployment, he established a pool of engineers to assist in humanitarian response with initial funding from Oxfam, right? Red Eye Australia was established in 1992 by a guy called Jeff Dobell in similar circumstances. He was also an engineer deployed to assist humanitarian responses, and saw the need for a pool of engineers to assist in disasters and crises. So WASH engineers was basically the foundation of Red Eye Australia. Hang on. Now, this vision became a roster that we have today, and is essentially a concept where readily available skilled humanitarian professionals have evolved over time to include much more than just engineers. So these days we have cluster coordinators, sexual gender-based violence specialists, education specialists, and so on, civil specialists. Now we are an international federation where we have offices in Australia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, the UK, and most recently, the US as well. For Red Eye Australia specifically, we have our head office in Melbourne. We have 2 regional offices. So one is based in Suva that I lead, and we have another office in the Middle East in Jordan, over in Amman. In the financial year 2020 to 2021, Red Eye deployed 115 specialists around the world to 31 program partners, and we in 30 countries, and over 50% of that was in the Pacific. And we delivered 7 core training courses to 183 participants. This month, so earlier this month and late last month, exactly where you're sitting, we delivered our 2 Essentials of Humanitarian Practice courses, where we had 60 people go through from the Fijian government, as well as civil society and NGOs. Hopefully you'll be able to join us in the near future. Speaking of civil military coordination, since 2010, we deployed 35 civil military coordination officers in 20 countries around the world. I was actually one of those. I was the person that got deployed to the AHA Center. The AHA Center is the regional humanitarian assistance disaster response center for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And approximately all of these deployments averaged to about 5 months. There were 13 females, 22 males, and it was a contribution of approximately about $2.5 million around the world. The person on the right, bottom right-hand corner, his name is Dale Potter. He actually responded to Tropical Cyclone Winston here, and also Cyclone Pan in the past as well. He's a police officer, by the way. So he was very good at his job. And more importantly, I want to open up to the room. I would like to hear your views. So this is a discussion. What does it mean to be a humanitarian? So could I please get some volunteers in the room to share their views on what it means to be a humanitarian for you personally?
Taking the mic around, Jenny. Here. John is John. The one to say something. You're looking intensely at me. I thought you wanted to say something. Pick up, John.
You for me personally, as humanitarian, it's more to do with opportunity to be able to take a position and use what I've learned over the years. A lot of so, like for one core group for the community. Good working for children of opportunity. Responding to communities.
Okay, could someone please give me a summary of that? It was very broken.
So you just heard from John, who works for Save the Children.
Yeah.
I'm just using keywords that he used: vulnerable communities. What else, John? I think that's John, can you summarize that quickly? One sentence.
Just summarize probably opportunity to help people where I can.
Yeah, okay. Helping people where you can, yep. What about from our military or police members? What does being a humanitarian mean to you personally?
Give them a mic.
There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just getting a view from people.
Using our skills and putting members of the community first, priority. Right. Additional to that, gives us a sense of organizational responsibility based on the needs of the community. With whatever they have to implement and to help them do the Lord.
To see the scenario from the victim's perspective, from the other side of the coin. I call it for the lady, you will give that.
Okay.
I think the humanitarian you have it's a very complex system because you have to first of all understand the dynamics of being a human and understand the skills which are involved in it, both the psychological, understanding all basic needs. So to be a humanitarian, basically, it's understanding and being able to care for welfare.
Okay, just one more. All right.
This is Fiji from Piango. I think being a humanitarian, filling up just a few words, being responsible, conscious of the need to have the urgency on the ground without discrimination, and I'm just going to push this a bit further into making sure that our environment is not affected while we are doing our humanitarian work.
Thank you for that. So I think all of you have touched on bits and pieces of what we'll be covering in the next hour or so. But I wanted to ask this question because the concept or the meaning of being a humanitarian differs from country to country and region to region and from individual to individual. But if we were to look at one common element of what it means to be humanitarian, is that all of us at an individual level do this or want to be part of this because one, it is the right thing to do, and two, as a normal human being, you want to help another human, okay, another person who's in need, right? So this is where I think a lot of the goodness and the bright, the brighter side of being part of human nature comes into light. And I think more importantly for this particular audience, for you, perhaps the understanding of the concept of your humanitarian, right, is also understanding what role in your profession you have to play during a disaster response or during the preparedness stages so that the communities are supported better than before, right? We can always improve going forward, right? But what we also understand is that communities all over the world today have long histories of helping themselves and their neighbors in times of need. If we were to understand it from a religious point of view, a lot of religious traditions put forward ideas of love and care for fellow humans in need, as does some secular humanist philosophy as well. In the modern humanitarian enterprise, so this is where we start touching on the professionalism of being a humanitarian, there are many organizations, hundreds, if not thousands of organizations. There are structures and approaches, and all of these have historical roots and they are constantly evolving. And in this region in the Pacific, we look to that because the Pacific now is starting to contribute to the global discussion of what professional humanitarians should be doing and what it looks like on the ground. The regional organizations such as ASEAN also have their way of providing or contributing to this global discussion. So we'll talk a little bit about that. As I mentioned, the concept of humanitarianism or being a humanitarian is now professionalized, it's highly professionalized, but a lot of them have actually this professionalism also comes with the idea that we are governed by fundamentals of the core principles and foundations in international law. So this is basically the history of why humanitarians today, so I'm talking about professional humanitarians today, do certain things the way how they do that. So when we talk about civil military police interaction, you'll find a lot of our NGO colleagues, our UN colleagues, the Red Cross, the movement, and grassroots civil society organizations try to inform people that it must be done in a certain way because of these core principles or foundations that's guided by international law. Now, there are three interpretations of this, and in there I got three big circles, right? So we have humanitarianism in conflict. So that's one interpretation, and this is the oldest interpretation of how humanitarianism developed. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then as this developed, it turned into humanitarians because of what's happening on the ground or the realities on the ground. It started to turn into, okay, what about needs-based humanitarianism? So is humanitarianism based on the needs-based requirements of what the ground in-field work demanded. And then now we're talking a lot more on rights-based humanitarianism. So at the tail end of bonus discussion, I heard, sex and age and gender disaggregated data, right? A lot of that has to do with rights-based humanitarianism. Everyone, you can't put people in one big group saying they need X, Y, Z, therefore they're going to just receive it. It doesn't work like that. Every people in the society require different things based on their age, based on their current situation, the disability, the gender, and so on. So a lot of that also stems from rights-based humanitarianism. This is more recent development when it comes down to humanitarian response. So like many things, it's very complex. There are a range of interpretations and approaches. There are lots of tensions and challenges. Even within NGOs and civil society organizations, there are tensions and challenges there because of the interpretation or the priorities. And there's also blurring of lines. Okay, if we look to the other part of the world today, like in the Middle East or in Africa, Africa is more of a hidden story these days. You'll start to hear humanitarian work being blurred with the politics of conflict, for example, right? We also hear a blurring of the lines in our region as well in the Pacific, because not necessarily because of conflict, but because there's a confusion in terms of who should be doing what at a particular time in a response, for example. Okay, so regardless, these three elements that you see in front of you are three broad interpretations of what humanitarianism is, and they all have their own legal frameworks. There are different actors, right? And there are implications of what we do within that. But the oldest category is the red category, right? So if we go back, the humanitarianism in conflict. So this is the oldest root. Now, before we jump into that, we'll talk a little bit about public international law or international law, because this governs how states or nations work. Is anybody familiar with international law? If so, would they be able to give me a bit of a snapshot on what that is? The key foundation of international law is just one thing traditionally. Could anybody in the room be able to tell me what that is? Sorry, did someone say something?
Oh.
What was that? Sovereignty. Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. Our international law that governs this world today is built on the concept of state sovereignty. Okay. State sovereignty basically means traditionally what happens within a country is the country's responsibility. So everything that happens within Fijian borders is the responsibility of the Fijian government. Everything that happens within Russia is the responsibility of Russia. Same with Australia and everything else. So this is one rule that everybody had agreed on back in the days, a long time ago. In the 1700s, like even before then. And this was a term that was coined by an English philosopher called Jeremy Bentham, a long time ago. But it's essentially international law is body of legal rules or norms or standards that apply between sovereign states and other entities that are legally recognized as international actors. The UN, right, is an international actor because it's legally recognized to be the case. And that's why sometimes you hear of some countries like Palestine who still fight for their sovereign rights, right? They're sometimes recognized as a sovereign state, sometimes not, depending on which country you're from. But that is basically the reason why they fight so hard for that. It is because once you are a sovereign state, you get all these credentials or rights that come with you as a state, because that is the foundation of international law. But basically, one of the caveats of international law is that it's only concerned with agreements between countries. So it's a little bit like you and I having a contract. Every state has a contract with each other. So you have trade agreements and things like that. And generally speaking, one of the downside to that is individual people and organizations have no power or standing in international law traditionally. Over the recent years, there's been a slight shift in that, but essentially that's what that is. Now, going back to the history of humanitarianism that's conflict related, is everybody familiar with what you see in front of you, the Geneva Conventions?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Okay, Geneva Conventions, there are 4 Geneva Conventions, right? Geneva Convention number 4, protection of civilians, is the last major development in the Geneva Conventions, and it was developed more in the 1990s after experiencing the Rwanda genocide and also in the former Yugoslavia, where they noticed that civilians were tactically targeted for the purposes of war, right? And they realized that's not really good. So they developed this, or they made an addition to the Geneva Conventions there called the protection of civilians. We are more interested in Geneva Conventions 1, the sick and the wounded. It's a convention that was designed to protect the sick and the wounded in the battlefield. And we traditionally call this the law of the armed conflict. So the rules that you need to follow when you decide to have a conflict between 2 countries, right? It all started with the Battle of the Solferino, 1859. There's a guy called Henry Dunant who basically created the foundation of the Red Cross movement. Okay. The purpose of this, or purpose of his work, was to help wounded soldiers. And after the battle, he recommended that we create a relief societies in peacetime to care for the wounded in times of war. And that led to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. I hope nobody's from the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement here. If you are, please do contribute. All right. He also recommended nations to adopt a treaty protecting healthcare services in the battlefield. And that's what the Geneva Conventions are, essentially. Okay. Now, one of the biggest outcomes of the Geneva Convention, or the first Geneva Convention, is this. Okay, this was one of the first outcome of Solferino. So the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement has 7 fundamental principles, and 4 are now recognized by the United Nations and humanitarian NGOs as the common humanitarian principles, and the 4 are in front of you today. The international humanitarian law is the rules of war. These humanitarian principles go beyond those grounds of war, okay? And that's the big takeaway from the Geneva Conventions, okay? All of these things you see govern how we look after people as humanitarians during war, right? But these 4 principles go beyond that. So it applies to the work that we do in the Pacific as well. So humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Okay. So we're just going to come back to these principles quite soon. My assumption is that you understand these principles, but we'll constantly come back to it because it is literally the foundation of what we do. And it is also the foundation of helping us to understand where our lane starts and where our lane stops. Okay. So we spoke a little bit about the humanitarianism in conflict, and then we're going to go to that green box where we start talking a little bit about the needs-based conflict. So after the Battle of Solferino, and then we have World War I, and then we have World War II, and then we had influx of people who were moving across borders, right? So these are all the refugees as a result of World War I and II going to different countries to save themselves, essentially, right? To go away from war. And there were refugee conventions, right, that was created to kind of assist in assisting those people who were in need, okay? So initially in conflict, it was more, okay, how do we, assist soldiers who were wounded in war? The needs-based was more like, okay, how do we assist people so that they're looked after when they are not looked after by their countries because they're outside that country, okay? And what this has, what humanitarian work has evolved now is, okay, initially humanitarian work is restricted to the work within conflict, but going into the needs-based humanitarians, this has now expanded the work of humanitarianism to go beyond conflict into two large areas where needs were the greatest, but that do not sit directly within the conflict environment. So these were people who were out of that conflict, but still needed assistance. So we call that mass displacement. And also now natural disasters. And this is the area now where it starts to become a little bit murky in natural disaster response, because people and the organizations responding to this are now expanding and the rules are more blurred because it becomes a little bit more loose, right? Because we don't have legal entities that guide in terms of, okay, when do we talk with the military? When do we not talk with the military? Or when do the military talk with the NGOs? When is it appropriate without having adverse implications in the work on the ground? So what we're going to do is from this point onwards, the relationship between humanitarians, so the civil society, the NGOs and the Red Cross, and the military become more crucial under the needs-based humanitarianism. And this means that a lot of the times humanitarians and the military will not only work together in conflict and non-conflict environments, but the relationship of the closeness needs to be managed. Okay, do you work right next to each other, or do you have to kind of have a bit of an arm's length approach so that you can still do the work that you need to do to assist people? But how can we do this? And also, what is the implication of your actions and the closeness that you have in proximity that will have another area? Okay. So to get a better understanding, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and hopefully you'll be able to share some of your views, and this will give us a bit of a direction on the civil-military relationships that we have. So let's start with an easy one. Who is responsible for the well-being of people affected by natural disasters or mass displacement within a country?
Any volunteers? Volunteers? All right, right here. The host government, that's an answer that we're getting.
Okay. Any other answers?
Everyone? Another answer from behind me.
You are correct. That was a trick. Remember the foundation of international law? It is the national government. You're right. The well-being of people affected by natural disasters or mass displacement within a country is the responsibility of the host government or the national government. So this comes back to the idea of sovereignty, and therefore what happens in their own country is their own responsibility, right? then if this is the case, what is the role of a humanitarian organization then? That is, if responding to a natural disaster or responding to a mass displacement is a crisis, then, and if the host government or national government is responsible for the people in there, then what's the role of a humanitarian organization? I'm asking the room.
Yeah, so I'm getting a response from Empower Pacific to assist. So humanitarian organizations are to assist.
Yeah.
Support.
Support.
Yes, support the coordination.
Yeah, supporting coordination. Excellent.
The response, sorry. Complement the
Complement, right?
Yeah, looking at the welfare of those affected.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So all of those things you've mentioned, the government is also responsible for doing, but sometimes they're overwhelmed, right? A lot of the times the government is overwhelmed, right? So the key implication in terms of the role of humanitarian organizations is that they're essentially there to fill gaps where the relevant national government capacity to meet the needs is overwhelmed, right? So you mentioned, I think one of our colleagues in the room mentioned something really important, looking after the welfare of the people on the ground, right? And you're right. And this is where the organizations can complement the work of the government, right? It is not to say that the government isn't doing their job, rather complementing the work they do, because naturally, disaster response or even in any sort of crisis, the likely chances that the government agencies are overwhelmed. So you have the civil society organizations, the NGOs who assist, especially when it comes down to the needs from the grassroots, right? So here you have the military who generally do the big picture logistics, right? And then you have other parts of the government that liaise, ideally, with the civil society members or different NGOs within the country to get an understanding of what's actually needed in the communities, right? And then there will be a coordination body like the NDMO. I think you've got that presentation yesterday or today, where they coordinate all this information and filter that information to the right departments or agencies so that they can complement each other rather than duplicating that work, right? From a bigger perspective, all right, so from a big picture point of view from another region is that, the police is generally sitting on a neutral ground where they become the mediators, right, between the police, the military and the humanitarians. So we call that the black and the blue arm of the UN during peacekeeping operations in complex or protracted crisis areas. So we'll see in a lot of UN peacekeeping operations. In places like ASEAN, there are a lot of the high-level discussions that happen with the military, the government agencies, the police, and also the UN and the NGO representatives to discuss how humanitarian assistance and disaster response is conducted. And then all of those policy works get filtered through to the ground level where the civil society provides their feedback. So with the hope that there is no gap in that coordination mechanism so that when there is a response, the very people who need that assistance is well received. Okay. So a lot of this, going back to that green circle is based on trying to understand what is actually needed on the ground from those very people who actually need that assistance. So in this case, the communities. What about the second question then? Assuming there is no ongoing armed conflict, is it okay for humanitarians to operate jointly with the military? There's no right or wrong answers in this one either, But what I would like to hear from you is the reasons for your answers. So is it okay for humanitarians to operate jointly with the military?
Right? Anyone? Yes? Yes. The room agrees, yes?
Okay, why?
Anyone?
Interesting.
Can you use the mic so you can hear you, sorry?
Humanitarianism does not end, carry on.
Okay.
Yes.
So what was the answer? What was the reason?
The work must go on, yes. The work must go on. Humanitarianism requires an ongoing sort of effort.
Okay, so the work must go on, okay. So that's the reason why it's okay to work with the military?
Anybody else?
For interest. So, don't know for the it is a strength. I mean, for humanitarian work is that the interests are not compromised by trading. I see that there's no reason. There not to be any cooperation.
Okay, what was that? Sorry. Vanya, you sound very clear, but anybody else in the room is very blurred. You'll have to be my translator, sorry.
So we had a response from the Navy. See, now I'm thinking too much. I've forgotten what he said. Can you repeat that?
I'm saying I'm not talking about in general. It's just a question. So the tuna is feels that the interests are not being compromised in working with the local military.
Did you hear that, Jenny?
Sorry.
Can you hear that, Jenny? Jenny's our colleague from Humanitarian for Tengula.
I think most of us are saying yes. But based on what our group is doing, the question is armed conflict. When armed conflict, the military operates differently. It operates differently from HCR instances. And I was just going to ask, Red Arrow Australia, have you had any experiences of training the military on an armed conflict? That would be interesting.
Okay. Okay, I'm hearing bits and pieces, but I think if I understood correctly, that there was a highlight about the military come with different things. Yeah, they have different roles, and you're correct. There are examples where the military in many countries have actively supported actually disaster responses within their own countries, but also overseas, right? And to a lot of, when it comes down to disaster response, it is accepted, right? But then when we start talking about the nature of the military's role in a response, then the answers differ a little bit, okay? I think one of our colleagues in the room mentioned that military come with different assets, if I understood correctly, and you're right. The military generally have assets that NGOs generally don't have, okay? You know, they have helicopters, they have trucks, they have people, they have a lot of manpower, and if put to good, they could save lives. And this is the essence of humanitarian requirements. This is the essence of humanitarian work, right? So the humanitarian imperative compels us to make use of it when it is necessary and when it is needed. But then on the flip side of the question, and this is probably more the important one, is, you know, the role of the military is also need to be thought of because of the nature of what the military is supposed to do, right? Do we allow the military, or is it okay for the military to do a direct response, or is it better if they do indirect assistance, okay? And remember how in our previous question, we talked about assisting the national government to be able to respond so that they can look after their people, because this is their job. Military is part of that government. You're exactly right. But a lot of the civil society and NGOs have the nuanced approaches on how a community can be supported, how an individual in a community can be supported because of their ongoing close relationship with them. And therefore, if you want to optimize that response, right, to fulfill the humanitarian imperatives, then is it better to understand exactly where our lane starts and where it ends? And this is when the discussion between civilians, so the humanitarian workers, and the military come more interesting, okay? Where can we optimize the military support in a humanitarian response versus, you know, do we let the military, because they have the manpower, because they have all the things that's very useful, to take over the humanitarian work and then do direct assistance? Yeah, so these are constant questions that come up, and these are constant discussions that we have. Which leads to this point here. Military personnel providing assistance to people in need are humanitarians. Is this true or false? This is nothing personal to our defense members in the room. But if you're a military personnel providing assistance to people in need, are you a humanitarian? Yes or no, or is it true or false? Did someone say false? Do we have true? If it's true, put your hand up, please, so I can at least see. Yeah, we have true. Okay. So military personnel providing assistance to people in need are humanitarians, and we have some true hand ups. Okay. Why is that? Why do you think this is true? Is there a reason why you think this is true?
Thank you. In my opinion, I'll actually agree that it is actually true. It is,
yeah.
Humanitarian itself, it speaks for itself, right? It's just a thing of surplus, just because of the uniform, right? You remove the uniform, the human being, they just want to provide the service.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. You know how in our first discussion at the beginning of the session, we spoke about, you know, what does being a humanitarian mean to you individually? And at the essence of it all, regardless of whether we have the uniform or not, we providing humanitarian assistance for the essence, right? The humanitarian imperative that is there as part of that human nature. You're exactly right. But if we were to put the legal system in there, so we spoke about the conflict humanitarianism, and then now the needs-based humanitarianism, we spoke a little bit about the legal systems that goes in it and the humanitarian principles. So if you were to put the humanitarian principles on top of that, would a military person providing, or military personnel rather, providing assistance to people in need considered humanitarians?
Well, to add on to also point, I believe that anyone going under a capacity like humanitarian and doing humanitarian work, regardless the profession is doctor or a nurse or a police officer, they are humanitarians under the capacity, and that means being facilitated in terms of all the legality and everything.
Yeah. And you're right. A lot of the discussions we have today align with a lot of the military and the police members who respond to humanitarian assistance in disaster response. And that is, yes, we are humanitarians. So it's the interpretation that's a bit different. If you were to strictly, and I'm going to go back a few slides, put the humanitarian principles on the other hand, the answer is no. Military and the police could never truly adhere to humanitarian principles. So this is concept of neutrality, impartiality, and independence, right? Because they're an arm of the government and they operate exclusively to serve the government policy. So I think for our military personnel here, the easiest way for me to explain this is you receive a mission statement and then you deliver to achieve that mission statement, right? And that mission statement comes from the government. You serve the government and the people within. And that is why, when we go back, when it comes down to neutrality and impartiality and independence, the government can never be a full humanitarian if we strictly abide by this. Okay? And that is why it is really important to understand the distinction between your individual humanitarianism, based on the principles that this is the professionalized humanitarian work that comes into place, because as a professional humanitarian, you are guided by these four principles. And as a government agency, it is very, very difficult to be independent because there is that mission statement that you must follow that is directed by the government. Okay. So I hope this is helpful in that sense, because that is generally the tension point where I think a lot of us get a little bit difficult in discussing. And that is why a lot of the times how I explain to the military and the way how I explain to myself when I was a military member is that, you know, in the humanitarian space, every actor has their own role and own contribution to make, so that from a bigger picture point of view, we serve the very people that we need to serve. And that is, as a military or even as police, you follow the government process, and then you respect the processes that the NGOs and the humanitarians follow. And together, if done well, we serve the very people that we need to serve. Okay. And this is where we can start drawing that distinction in terms of what our roles and capacities are. Now, you would have come across this, the United Nations Civil Military Coordination. So I've highlighted the most important part, right? This is a UN definition of what they believe a civil military coordination looks like or should be. And this is what the UN civil military coordination officers will follow when they're responding, regardless of where they go. But essentially, the principles are really important for anyone. between civil organizations and the military and also the police in between, it is an essential dialogue during times like this. So this is what we're doing today, right? We're having this essential dialogue, right, on what the military can do, what the civil society brings to the table, and what the NGOs and the UN can bring to the table in times of response. Okay, and the reason for that is it is extremely important to protect and promote humanitarian principles in that. Because whatever happens in Fiji or whatever happens in the Pacific, when it comes down to civil military dialogue or coordination, has an impact on what happens in Africa, for example, because a lot of the agencies that work with us in Fiji also have arms or agencies that work in a completely different continent. So what can you do, okay, as part of this? The humanitarians are guided by the humanitarian principles, as we've discussed, and a lot of the assistance is based on need, right? So what is needed on the ground from the very people? And they do this regardless of who the government is, who the partners on the ground. Impartiality becomes very important, and neutrality is very important. It's basically providing the assistance based on the need of the people without taking any sides on disputes, politics, right, or beliefs, right? Military, on the other hand, contribute to humanitarian action by being provided a mission statement. So the government says, you will provide helicopter transport to XYZ to deliver 20,000 boxes to this community, and the military will do that, right? A civil society organization cannot go to the military and say, hey, can you deliver, you know, my 20 boxes here over to community X? The civil society doesn't have the mandate or the authority to do that. It can only go to the government, right? The government is the only agency in that particular country. They can direct the military on what needs to be done, and the military decides how it will be done, right, to fulfill that mission statement. Okay, so as you can see from here, even these two definitions alone, the civil society or the NGOs, they deal a lot more with people. We call this direct assistance. And a lot of the military is generally very useful and very efficient and very good when it comes down to the logistics of how things are done or when things are moved, right? And as this, right? So if we look at the right-hand side, so if we look at the conflict-related humanitarianism, right? It is very difficult. Well, you can both achieve the information sharing, task division and planning and whatnot. But in terms of, you know, does the military sit right next to the humanitarians? The answer is probably not. They work more at an arm's length. And then you'll have a neutral mediator in between to communicate between the military, the police, and also the civil society or the humanitarian agencies, right? In conflict, that's what happens. In a natural disaster, so more to our context, it's okay to be seen right next to the military because, and we can have a direct dialogue or conversation in terms of what kind of information can be shared, yeah, how the task can be divided, and how we can plan together. So all of you being in this room today is okay because we're not part of a conflict. If I were to put this room in middle of South Sudan, for example, today is probably not a good look, and it will also jeopardize the operations on both ends of the spectrum, both the blue UN as well as the black UN, because there will be a lot of miscommunication that come out of that, or all of you being in that one room. And this is just by switching geographical locations, right? And this is where we talk about coordination mechanisms and how we do the coordination. So I think we kind of blessed today in a way where we can all be in that one room and have these sort of discussions without the fear of jeopardizing our work. So here it is. I think many of you would have heard about the types of assistance, right, that the military can do. And you would have heard the cookie, the truck, and the bridge, right? So I'll remind you again. So direct assistance is what we call the cookie, right? This is the face-to-face distribution of goods and services. This is rarely done, and where this is done is also different from geographical locations. Right? There's that indirect assistance, so the truck. So this is where we start talking about transport stuff, logistics. You know, the military is very, very good at this because one, they have it, they have the manpower, and they also have a structure already in place where if provided that mission, they can make it work, right? Very efficient. And then there's the infrastructure support. Again, with the manpower and the capacity that they have, if you have a bridge that's broken that needs repairment, you just call the military and they'll be able to do this, right? So what we generally suggest that even in disaster response, it is a lot easier to call military support to do the indirect and the infrastructure support, or the indirect assistance and the infrastructure support. But when it comes down to direct assistance, it becomes a little bit more tricky, right? Because the military, the day-to-day job is not about talking to the community and then finding out, you know, what this person needs, what that person needs, what this community needs as a priority. This is not their day-to-day job. This is the day-to-day job of the civil society or the grassroots organizations, right? They have that constant dialogue with the community. So it's more efficient and effective if they actually do the direct assistance to the communities. More efficient and effective if the military does the indirect assistance to assist the civil society or the humanitarians, for instance, because this is their bread and butter, right? This is the military's bread and butter. You do this every day, right? So I think the key point here is we stick to what we are very good at, sticking to our lanes, and then and this is how we assist each other the most, right? In a conference like this, where we actually share what we can do and what we can't do, what we do every day. That way, when it comes down to real-time response, we can optimize our efforts. Now, for those of you who are interested, these are some of the guidelines. These are not legal points, but these are actually guidelines that provide some information on how we can optimize the use of military assets or the military personnel, and how we can communicate with each other effectively. Okay, so that was it from needs-based humanitarianism, okay, is putting people at the core, the effective communication at the center of our response, and understanding where our scope of responsibilities begin and at the end, and how we can pass over that baton to the other organizations who are very good at what they do. And of course, the rights-based humanitarianism, okay. So if we reflect on the humanitarianism in conflict, it was all about people are suffering and they need assistance. And then we start thinking about what do people actually need and how do we deliver that, and understand or try to understand what your job is as a military or as an NGO. And then now we link a little bit more into the right-based humanitarianism, which talks about everyone's basic rights. Okay, so going back to Bona's discussion about the needs of people on the ground are very different depending on their background, depending on the current situation and environment, whatnot, right? So everyone has basic rights to certain things, okay, such as food, safety, dignity, and etc. And we need to make sure that assistance is a way to ensure that those rights are met. So a lot of the times the how really matters, and the people who understands the how and who and when it needs to be delivered are the people on the ground, and they're generally our grassroots civil society organizations and NGOs. Okay. The reason why this becomes so important is because of this. Again, we talk about the big international legal system, right? The UN Charter, which is divided into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all of this lead into the domestic law. And technically, the domestic, so the governments who sign up to the Bill of Rights should have domestic laws in place that not only follow these mandated rights internationally, but essentially laws that govern the rights of people, that ensure that everyone in each of those countries are met so that they can fulfill the rights that's eligible to them. Okay. But essentially, the rights-based humanitarianism have 4 key implications. Okay. The need to be people-centered and accountable, right? So rights-based humanitarianism means putting affected people at the center of all we do. Okay, so it's not about you, it's not about me as a responder, it's about people who are affected by this and understanding how we can assist these people as to the best of our ability, right? People should not be seen as passive recipients of aid, but rather as active right holders in their own right. They also have the right to participate in the process of humanitarian aid and to hold their governments and humanitarians to account. And this is why you'll hear a lot about the civil society organizations, the grassroots organizations, as well as the NGOs doing a lot of consultations with the communities before a response during the preparedness stages, because people do have the right to participate in the process of informing people what they will need and also understanding what they need, right? The need for minimum standards. I won't go into this much longer, but essentially the minimum standards is what Bona was talking about. And essentially affected people have the right to humanitarian assistance, of course, and their right to a life with dignity. And the way for us to understand whether this has been realized or not is through the minimum standards. So you would have heard about the SPHERE guidelines or the SPHERE handbook. That handbook basically provides a foundational guideline on the minimum standards or minimum requirements to ensure that an aid is received with dignity, right, for individual. Okay. Now, have you discussed the code of conduct yet? No? Yes? Okay.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet? All right. So you know how we were talking about the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement? Okay. The code of conduct, there are 10 principles. So these are the principles that all humanitarians follow. And it started with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And now the NGOs in disaster relief also follow this. It was developed in the 1990s and basically it's now become central to the humanitarian world, right? So over 600 organizations have signed up to these principles. And these 10 principles are essentially what all the humanitarians try to follow when they're responding, regardless of country, region, or borders, right? So I thought I'd just share this with you because it's quite important, but also gives you a good understanding in terms of the foundations or the core of the humanitarian work that we do. All right, so just to finish off, I just wanted to state that, you know, humanitarian world today is filled by different organizations. There are many, right? And there are different interpretations of humanitarianism, and they are not wrong. Every individual has a different understanding of what humanitarianism is, what it means to them. And regardless of what uniform or what organization you belong to, I think we can safely say that most people do that with a good heart, right? Of wanting to assist others. What is important though, is that we as a professional humanitarian is guided by humanitarian principles. And if you are part of the government, it's very difficult to follow those humanitarian principles, not because you don't want to, not because the government doesn't want to, but essentially because you are the government. There are different roles for the government, right? But what is important is for us to understand what our job is, what our roles are, where it starts, where it ends, be honest about what we can and what we can't do, and then share that information with others so that we have better coordination, for one thing, but also optimize the work that we are very good at, right? So you know, it's not about you doing every part of the humanitarian response cycle, but rather doing parts of that optimally so that it's efficient, so that the beneficiaries or the people on the ground who actually need that receive the best care and assistance when it's needed the most. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Jenny, for your presentation. We have about 10 minutes left before we go to lunch, so we'll open up for questions. If you have any questions around the room, any burning questions, or if anyone would like to make a statement about the presentation that Jenny have just taken us through.
Thank you, Jenny. On children not being humanitarian. It's really a hard thing for leadership to tell the soldiers not to be humanitarian. Because I remember in the Middle East, you get told off for giving food to people. Suppose the ATF does that. But you can't help it. Children see somebody looking crumpled up and a bit thin. They will stop and have a meal. They will stop and be humanitarians. So, thank you for your presentation this morning. And I just want to say, Pacific Islanders, they're natural humanitarians.
Any other questions or statement before I pass it to Jenny? Would you like to respond to that, Jenny, the statement from
Okay, was that a question?
No. It was more of like a statement on the military not being humanitarian because of the reasons that you've set out. The statement made was that it's hard not to be humanitarian when you come into a place of crisis, and then ended on the note that being a Pacific Islander, it's being humanitarian comes naturally. It's too hard to stay away from that. Would you like to respond to that statement?
No, and look, I empathize with you, and in fact, I absolutely empathize with you, and there will be millions of other people in uniform who would empathize with you on that. It's even as a person who used to wear the uniform, it's very difficult because the mandate of a military member is to serve the people, right, of your nation. is rarely the reasons are you're there to participate in a conflict and then kill people, right? You're there to serve people. And I think that's where it becomes very difficult for a lot of our members in the armed forces when they get told they're not a humanitarian because of the humanitarian principles. It's very, as an individual, at an individual level, it's very difficult to understand that, because as an individual, you are a humanitarian, right? But I think it's also very important to also understand, as a person in the armed forces and also in law enforcement, for that matter, that your role as a professional is super important, right? Without the military support, without the policing, it's very difficult for the humanitarians to be able to do the work they do at a professional level, right? And that is why the humanitarian principles are there. When things get very complicated, we have to, bite our tongues and do what we need to do, and we need to do our jobs. And that's why the humanitarian principles are there. And because in some parts of the world that we go to, and I think if you're in the room who's been to a peacekeeping operations, which a lot of the Fijians do, you will understand the importance of impartiality and neutrality, and also independence. Without those three, humanitarians will not be able to reach to the hardest places where people need help the most. I wish I had more time, because there are some really good stories that highlight the importance of this, and that's why it needs to be. That's why it's really important to be consistent in following these. So it's not to undermine the work of the military or the police in law enforcement. It's actually to enhance the work that you do, so that you can focus on that. Because once law enforcement is down-packed, and once the logistics through military is down-packed, humanitarians can actually do the work to reach to the very people who need it. And all of those actors, including the military, the police, the humanitarians, and the UN, if they're there, they all have a role to play. And once an environment caters for that, which all of us have, a role in, the best benefit that come out of it is the very people who need the assistance the most, and they receive that optimal assistance without any other repercussions as a result of it. So, that's how I was able to get my mind around it. When I'm in uniform, I have to make sure that I keep to my lane. That way my colleague, from Civil Society X can actually do their job to reach, beneficiary Y, so that they receive the support that they need. Right? So, we totally empathize as human beings. I think we can, and especially in the Pacific Islands, where the communities are all interlinked with each other by family or by friends, it's a lot harder. But I hope this does provide that bit of clarity and assisting in shaping that lane, if you will.
Thank you, Jenny. Any other comments? Any last comments or burning questions that you would like Jenny to respond to? Frank, should be fine now. Hi, Jen, can you hear?
It's unclear. Did you say something?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
First of all, I just might be wondering why so many questions and comments from guys here, the RFMS. Basically, all this is due to us. at our level, at the operational level, and so for personally, we're the ones who actually all these
Can you hear me now? How about now, Jenny? Is it coming? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm from the Navy. I just wanted to take the time to thank you for your presentation. Basically, we're from the operational level, and all this is new to us, especially understanding the concept of being a humanitarian. Understanding, because if we understand the roles that we play in terms of indirect assistance and in terms of infrastructure, concept of the cookie, the truck, and the bridge, we can facilitate our roles better. And I thank you for your presentation today. I just wanted to take the time to thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments. That was very clear.
I think that's it from us, Jenny, this morning. Again, I just want to take this time on behalf of course, as the organizer and our friends and colleagues around the room to thank you again for giving your time and for that wonderful presentation. And just maybe just letting you know, if we can have a copy of your presentation so that we can share with the participants, if that is possible, then that would be great. Thanks, Jenny. If anything, then we'll send across if any other questions are going to rise up from from the floor. And if feel free to stay with us again after lunch. We're breaking for lunch now, and we'll reconvene again around 1:30 Suva time. And I know that would be around 11:30 your time. If possible, then that would be great.
Okay. Look, thank you very much. I think I got another question from Empower Pacific. Is that a question for me or to FCOS colleagues?
Yes, Jenny, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I got in late, but I do have a question for you.
Okay.
This is in regards to your last slides, the 10 principles, code of conduct. The third one, which says aid will not be used to further a particular political or religious standpoint. I was just wondering, have you ever experienced a situation where you feel that aid, has been used to gain political mileage? And if you do, what are some of the measures that you take to be able to combat that? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, all the time. All the time. So these 10 principles, the code of conduct, are principles that humanitarians try to follow. And it is only, from my experience, at least in the past, it is only when government agencies, when there is a murky interpretation of what humanitarian principles are, or what the principles are, right? When the government decides to, take that forward, it is okay. It is fully up to the government to decide, that they want to have humanitarian or deliver humanitarian assistance in times of crisis. It is natural, it is their role under the international law, especially within that sovereign rights. It is their responsibility to do that, to look after their people. And in concept, that is humanitarian. The 10 principles of the code of conduct that the professional humanitarian organizations follow and are the code that, you know, every individual within that organization tried to follow. Now, have they been broken? Yes, absolutely. Is it the right thing to do? Not always. Is there always room for improvement? Absolutely, right? Now, how do we rectify that? It's through constant advocacy, right? Even humanitarians need to be reminded a lot of the times, you know, that the government needs to do what they need to do under their sovereign rights. The military and the police that fall within that government have their roles, and therefore we need to let them do what they need to do. And at the same time, we need to advocate within the government as well, or to the government and its respective agencies, that humanitarian work professionally must adhere to these rules. One of them being, you know, aid cannot be used to further a political ground or a religious standpoint, because the foundation of those principles of humanitarianism is based on the needs on the ground, regardless of who they are or what they represent, right? And, you know, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement is very good at that. There have been failures of that. When I was with ASEAN, I saw that we were responding to the Rohingya crisis, and there was a lot of discussions about what this meant politically and also religiously, right? Actually, whether we like it or not, and how do we deliver so that, you know, the very people who need it the most can receive that aid. There is also a constant discussion, as you know, today globally about the constant politicization of aid. You know, is it good? Is it bad? There are points to both sides of the stories, but I think as a humanitarian, we need to understand and we need to learn how to navigate around those challenges, because these are the real challenges. And we need to find ways of doing that, of navigating around that, so that we can still adhere to our code, but also to deliver in a principled approach. And one of those ways of navigating that is to have this honest conversation with all actors in the room when we get this opportunity. This opportunity we have is a golden opportunity. And the more honest our discussions are, the more honest we are with challenges, the more we can go further when it comes down to actual response. And you're right. The third point is becoming harder and harder. It's definitely a lot harder than it was 20 years ago. It will become harder and harder, I think, in the near future. But I'm sure with honest discussions, we'll be able to go one step further, right? And I think that's the broader part of conversations like this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for the response. I believe there's no more questions or comments from the room, unless you have any last words or any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us. If not, then I think that's it for us.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for your time. Please don't hesitate to visit our office in Suva. We're on top of Fiji Airways office. It's central Suva. So please don't hesitate to knock on our door, and we'll have Penna and Danette coming welcoming you with open arms. So please do come and say hello. Please keep well, please keep safe, and I'll see you back in Suva very soon. Thank you very much for your time today, everyone.
Yeah, going back to one of the reasons we're here, City Milk Coordination, thinking about the info sharing task division and planning based on strengths that different parties in this group bring to a situation, I think would be really helpful. Again, after the break, I'll extend on what Jenny's mentioned about rights-based humanitarianism. And after that, we're going to have a big reflection. And I think the division of roles, as mentioned by Jenny, will play quite a prominent part in that conversation before we pack up and call the workshop.
I believe the lunch is ready. If I can have someone to bring for lunch. We do it before we here at 1:30. That's the people's channel.
Please, when you come back, I'd ask you to have your name tags very clearly on your shirt because I'll need to use.
You've updated it or
my computer and to control your plan. With those on the presentation I'm going to use.
no, you can use your computer. Just,
So how do I do that?
you're into the Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
At the same time.
Okay. You allow us to share.
Admit decorum.